Vodcast. This is Dr. Achina Stein, and today I am interviewing Laurie Villarreal. She is a functional nutritionist and lifestyle practitioner who helps driven women master their energy, mind, and mood to level up their performance and play bigger in their life and work. She has come to my attention because she has demonstrated, I should say, an expertise in hypoglycemia specifically. And I find that to be one of the root causes for some of my patients who are having anxiety and depression. And it's really, really hard for people to pick up on that, even when you're actually looking for it, because it's kind of hidden there. And it is important to know specifically what to look for. And that's why I've asked Laurie to join me today so that we can really drill down on hypoglycemia and blood sugar dysregulation on the lower side, as opposed to, say, diabetes and insulin resistance on the other side. I'll be interviewing Dr. Beverly Yates for that piece of it. So today we're just going to focus on hypoglycemia and blood sugar dysregulation. Welcome, Laurie, to my podcast. I'm so glad you were able to come today and join me on this topic.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. And I absolutely love talking about this topic. And I also love the work that you do. I think it's so amazing and so important. And I feel honored to be here helping you spread the message to the world.
Oh, thank you so much. That makes my heart pitter-patter. Thank you. So yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how much depression and specifically actually anxiety and even panic attacks can be caused by blood sugar dysregulation. But before we even dive into that, I really want people to understand how you even got into this and how did you even become this expert? And I know you've done some incredible athletic feats that I would love for you to talk to our audience about, and what happened and how that brought you here.
Yes. Well, actually, I think this blood sugar journey that I've been on has been since I was a teenager, because both of my parents had type 2 diabetes growing up. So blood sugar was in the discussion. So that's when I first started thinking oh, this is something important. And I started also tracking my own as a teenager, just kind of wanting to learn about it, wanting to know where I was at. And then, in my youth, I began to have a big interest in health because I could see the declining health of my parents, and I knew I wanted different for myself. And so in that way, I got really into fitness and weight training. And then I got into long distance running. And then, that sort of grew bigger and bigger. And nutrition has always been important to me, but I would say that I didn't know that much about it back then. And when you start learning about mainstream nutrition, it can be so confusing. And I think at that time, what I thought was healthy, I've since learned wasn't actually helping me. But I went down this path of being interested in health, being interested in fitness. Blood sugar was always in the background of my mind of oh, I've got to keep looking after that. I had never considered at the time hypoglycemia so much, except I did experience as a young adult, my dad going into a hypoglycemic episode and seeing how that actually changed his behavior. And that directly said to me, blood sugar has the power to influence our mind, because my dad was a completely different person. And I was really confused, what is going on with him? But then as I got further and further into the fitness world, I ended up starting my own business, and I started training athletes. And I myself was, a long distance runner and a multi-marathoner. And I've been doing that, all over the world, and also doing it up and down mountains. And recognizing at the time as an athlete and also even as a coach that, I did understand the relationship to the stress that I was putting on my body and the impact that could have on my health, but I had not yet recognized the impact that it could also have on my blood sugar, and therefore also on the bigger picture of my hormone health. Until my hormones started kind of like in my mid 30s, I started having lots of issues that seemed directly related to hormone health. And I also could not find anybody at the time when I started suffering from all of these symptoms to help explain to me what was going on. And it wasn't until things got really debilitating, and I had spent many years like concentrating heavily on health and fitness. So it seemed so confusing to me that suddenly like my health was falling apart and I could not figure out what was going on. And that's when I got into functional medicine and really started understanding about like, going deep and getting to the root of the issues, and had realized that, throughout this time, I had always been interested in blood sugar. That's what got me into this health journey that I was on. But for some reason, I had sent myself down the path of, like the stress that I was creating in my body, and that, the longer distance runs. And then, sometimes I was like fasting while I was running, and all of these things that I was trying and doing were having a negative impact on my body and my blood sugar and my hormones. And then when I started putting the pieces together, I decided myself that I was going to make that shift. I had been working, to help athletes do, crazy feats in their life, these crazy things. And what I decided I wanted to do more was really help people get back that balance in their life, in their bodies, so that they really felt their best, whatever they're doing. And really what I felt like, because in my journey, I had my own business, and my symptoms became so debilitating that it really stopped me from living the life that I like had envisioned for myself. Like I couldn't, not only could I not do the, the physical feats that I was doing before, but like even running a business and just doing the day to day, like started to become so challenging for me. And I recognized that like I got into all of that because of health. Like that's the first thing that was important to me. So I just came full circle and was like, like I'm back to health is really the priority here. So like I'm going to make whatever shifts that I needed to prioritize my health in the best way. And then I also wanted to do the same for others. So that's when I shifted my practice. So now I'm like functioning, I'm practicing primarily in functional medicine, and I do bring in the movement with my fitness background. Like I do bring that in because exercise does have a big influence on your health and of course on blood sugar, as we're going to discuss. But that's what got me there. And I feel super passionate about it. And when I, when I think about it, I'm like, I've been going down this journey since I was a kid, because I've been interested in it, and who would have ever known that it would have brought me here? But yeah, what an amazing place to be.
Right. Absolutely. So and so you said one thing that I really want to point out is that a lot of times athletes tend to fast, right? And people have this idea that intermittent fasting is a healthy thing to do, and it is for some people. And so it's really important for people to know when that is a healthy option for you, or something to try, and how to, and something to try in a safe way, and working with someone to know whether or not that's a good option for them is really, really important. So, there's a whole lot to talk about here. And so you brought up fasting, and we weren't even going to talk about fasting. But,
let's go there.
Exactly, because fasting can cause you to become hypoglycemic, right?
Absolutely.
So, and cause more problems for you. So it's really important to do that kind of thing safely, and to understand how to do it safely. Anyway, so let's just dive right in and tell, why don't you just tell the audience, our listeners, about what hypoglycemia is, so people understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, hypoglycemia is when your blood sugar is going too low. And every body is going to be a little bit different. So your low might be different from my low, but the body wants to keep your blood sugar in balance. So it's always trying to achieve homeostasis. And when it hits a low point, the body has to bring that level back up again. So it's making, having the blood sugar go low is creating more work for your body to bring it back up. So that that period of hypoglycemia can also create symptoms as well and make us not feel our best. And because the body is having to do that extra work, and it's having to actually use like different hormones in our body. And some of those specific hormones are related to our stress hormones, the cortisol. It's having to use cortisol and maybe even adrenaline to bring our blood sugar levels back up again. So it's calling upon the stress hormones. It's calling upon that system every time our blood sugar goes low.
Right. And so normal is, from a conventional sense, 60 to 100. I like to see the blood sugars between 60 and 80. And so when you're talking about low, you're talking about under 60.
Yes.
Correct.
And I've even seen that like some people feel that low a little bit higher as well. You know, like it depends on what your blood sugar looks like throughout the day also.
Right.
But some people can feel more sensitive to a different low than another person. But yes, from you were saying from a conventional level 60, and I'm also over here in Europe, so my mind is half the time in another measurement. But yes, lower than that. If it's going below, and in my practice and from a functional perspective, I really like to keep blood sugar within a 30-point range when we're talking about the US system. And so that would be like bringing it even below that 30-point range that you are in. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what kinds of symptoms show up that people can have besides, anxiety, depression, and maybe even panic attacks? That might make one think, oh, I'm having a hypoglycemic episode. What kinds of other symptoms can accompany that?
Yeah, I mean, it can show up differently in different people, first of all, but there are a variety of symptoms that you could experience, from like headaches, fatigue, dizziness, maybe even noticing you can't concentrate as easily. Feeling just a little more moody and irritable, like that hangry feeling can come also.
Right. Hangry is a really common symptom, particularly with kids and teenagers. Yes. Right. Really. Yes. I mean, not just adults, but it seems to be it shows up a lot more, I feel like, with young kids and teenagers.
Yes. And that's just the subtle change that's happening that's affecting your mood. It's making you more irritable. It's making you like lash out at people, feel a little bit more moody, like you need to have your sugar fix. And you had also touched on anxiety and depression, having a low moment or having an anxious moment or even a panic attack can even like elevate your heart rate. Right. Because like I said before, it's also calling upon our stress hormones. It's putting us often into the sympathetic, turning that sympathetic dial of our nervous system. So like
fight, flight.
Yeah.
It's so like so when the when the blood sugar drops below a certain point, the alarm bells go off. And because your whole body needs blood sugar on a cellular level. So if so the sirens go off, and it's our adrenals that are kicking on to push cortisol into our bloodstream, which then sends signals to basically to the liver to say, all right, let's push out all that glucose, converting glycogen to glucose and rushing all of that into our cells. And that's why, your heart rate goes up, and even to the point of having heart palpitations, and not just increased heart rate, but even heart palpitations, because we got to get that glucose to every single cell of the body, particularly the brain, and to get things back into balance. And that's the fast way. But you're right that it's a lot of work on the body. It's extremely stressful to the body when that kind of thing happens. So what is it that we can do differently to if we do recognize that, if someone does recognize that they're having a hypoglycemic episode or blood sugar dysregulations, ups and downs like that, what is it that you could tell our audience to do if they recognize they're having those symptoms? What would be the first steps?
Well, if you recognize you're having the symptoms, I mean, one of the things that you would, probably want to do is you're going to want to eat usually when you're feeling hangry or you're having that low or you're feeling tired. And you probably need something at that moment to make you feel better. But whether or not you need food is a different story, because you likely have eaten enough, let's say, maybe, I mean, unless you've been fasting. But one of the easiest ways to prevent these is to create like stability throughout the day. To create blood sugar stability throughout the day can help prevent you from dipping into those lows. And even like you had mentioned before, being careful with fasting. Like, this is a tool that can be very powerful. It's not right for everybody. And especially if somebody doesn't have regulated blood sugar, if you don't have regular blood sugar stability, then using a tool like fasting can work against you. And if you have, if you're somebody that has a lot of stress, you're very stressed, or you're in a high period of stress, it can also work against you then. So it's good to work with somebody that can let you know if that is the right tool for you right now. But otherwise, like, finding stability in your blood sugar throughout the day. And a lot of times you might hear like that just means eat more often. Or I've even seen people that are like, oh, I'm having a hypoglycemic episode. Let me grab some sugar. Like, let me go get a piece of candy.
Right. Right. And that's not the best thing to do.
No, because you're, like, you think that it's the blood sugar that you want to regulate, so you add sugar, but that's not the case.
Right.
What we actually need to have stable blood sugar is to be having foods that are not spiking our blood sugar. And the foods that typically spike the blood sugar are the ones that are sugary, like the candy, the sugary foods and the highly processed foods. And even, highly processed oils, like these highly processed oils that people fry foods in and things. That these are the foods that are going to cause our blood sugar to not be as regulated. So in a hypoglycemic episode, like, I would recommend somebody to have maybe nuts or something that's just going to help it bring back some more stability.
Right.
Because when it goes low, the body is going to want to bring it up. So instead of the body having to do the hard work to bring it up, to initiate, to send off those alarm bells, as we are talking about, some nuts for people that can handle nuts would actually cause a different response. That would be like, then your body is like, okay, I've got this and I can hang out stable for a little while.
Right. So there is a list of foods, and I don't know if this is the case in Europe, because we hadn't talked about this, but of low glycemic index or low glycemic load foods to stick to, in terms of adding back or prevent these kinds of issues, and to have more frequent meals, but also choosing certain foods in a certain class or a certain class of foods called low glycemic load or low glycemic index foods.
Yes. And we also have that list here. And what's interesting about that list, and because I use continuous glucose monitors with my clients, which are not very, they're not readily available everywhere, but when you are able to use that, it's such eye-opening information to what each individual can tolerate and not tolerate. So this list of low glycemic and high glycemic foods is based on, I want to say it was based on like 100 people or something like that. And like how the average response to these foods from a smallish number of people. And I would say that like it hits the nail a lot of the time for people. But sometimes, certain foods people are going to react differently to different foods.
Absolutely.
And when I'm talking about finding stability throughout the day, things like having fiber, fat, and protein with your meals, like prioritizing fiber, fat, and protein with meals and snacks. Because if you just have that apple alone without any fiber, there is fiber in apple without any fat or protein, you would possibly have a much different blood sugar response than you would have if you had it with, say, a nuts or maybe a piece of cheese or something like that. So it's the food, but it's also how you combine those foods. And so if you're able to combine foods in a way that doesn't cause your blood sugar to spike and then
Right.
fall,
Right.
or, then you are able to maintain more stability throughout the day. And that can also help prevent your body from going into that
Right.
low.
Like a
And
piece
but
of
there,
apple, like a piece of apple with peanut butter on it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's perfect. That's the perfect solution.
Yes.
Not orange juice. Okay. Orange
Yes.
juice is for that person who's in emergency insulin, crash. And
Yes.
that's why they use that for convention, from a conventional standpoint, it's like, get the orange juice, but that's just to rescue someone. It's not going to fix your dysregulation. So what we're talking
Exactly.
about is fixing the dysregulation. And I agree with you. It's a combination of carbs with fiber in it, but oils and protein. That combination is really, really important. And in adding, are there other types of snacks besides apple with peanut butter or a handful of nuts that
I
you
mean,
would recommend?
carrots and cheese, or, like, I don't always recommend dairy for everybody, but, like it, I think it's a good place to begin if you're just now like diving into finding more stability and shifting your diet, making those shifts, that finding you could even do carrots and walnuts, or, like, I love seeds,
Mm-hmm.
like a chia pudding, or
Mm-hmm. Right.
there are lots of, I would have said hummus in the past, to be honest, like carrots and hummus, but I
Right.
have seen on the continuous glucose monitors that a lot of the time that doesn't have the response that I thought it would have.
Oh, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. No, that's
Yeah.
very, very interesting. You're absolutely right about the continuous glucose monitor. And there is a brand called Libre. I don't know if that's
Yes.
the one that you use there, but in the US, there are some insurances that will pay for it for 14 days, 7 to 14 days,
Yes.
and it's just a matter of ordering it and going and picking it up at the pharmacy and using that for 2 weeks. It really does help to track what kinds of foods are that you're reacting to. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
so the problem with though in monitoring the meals is that sometimes or looking at food as a way to control the hypoglycemia is that sometimes people end up eating 5 or 6 meals a day, and they have to
Yes.
make sure that they eat every 2 to 3 hours, and some conventional doctors are like, yeah, well, that's what you're gonna have to do. It's like, but I don't want to live like that. Right?
And you
So
don't have to do it.
right. So how can you talk about how someone moves out of that space? It's great that their blood sugars are now regulated. So how do they move out of that space to a more normal pattern of eating where you can have 2 to 3 meals, and not have to carry food around with you in the car or in your purse, and planning, on a regular basis, and then being fearful of, oh my gosh, if I can't get that food, what's going to happen, right? Can you
Right.
talk about that?
Yeah. So once you found stability, once you're able to, and yes, some people recommend doing that with regular meals, but even with those regular meals, you would also want to ensure like the fat, fiber, and protein, or you want to know that your blood sugar is not spiking every time that you have a meal or a snack. And then once you're at that point, you can start to add in more space between those meals. So maybe you take out your snack that you had between breakfast and lunch, and then maybe after you've done that for a moment and that's going well, you remove the snack between lunch and dinner. And then maybe after that's going well, you try to move your dinner a little bit earlier, so you have a bigger gap between dinner and breakfast. So you're maybe, fasting for 12 to 14 hours between dinner and breakfast. And then, if that's still going well and you've talked to somebody that wants to introduce maybe a longer fast throughout your day, and you'd really rather do 2 meals, then you could also work towards shifting that way. I usually recommend going slowly, and also just being honest with yourself. If you're able to stick with the foods that, like you had mentioned, the list of low glycemic and high glycemic foods, if you're able to stick with the foods that tend to not have a high glycemic response, if you feel like if you're not feeling the symptoms anymore of, low blood sugar, like we had talked about earlier, and if you're
Right.
not feeling this, maybe the symptoms of also high blood sugar, because they could go hand in hand sometimes, then I would say, then you can start spacing that out and see how you feel, because that can also make an improvement on how you regulate your blood sugar. Your blood sugars can find more balance when you aren't having food as often as well.
Right.
It can work both ways, like the having food often can maybe help temporarily, but it's not a long-term for health and longevity. It's not usually a long-term
Solution.
method. No.
Right. Yeah, it's not a long-term solution. And you're really working your gut constantly if you're constantly putting food in, just to maintain your blood sugars, because there is some benefit to allowing your gut to rest, and so, having, I think 3 meals a day is probably ideal. For some people, it's 2 meals, a day. So it's dependent on where they're at. But I think 6 or 7 meals is not going to be really good for your gut in the long term. And so, there's other factors so I think it's important to mention, well, why does somebody even get to this place where they're having blood sugar dysregulation? It doesn't mean that it all comes down to food. There are other factors besides food that gets people there. We did mention stress, right?
Yes.
So stress reduction and management is going to be very, very important to implement during this time as well. But I also think that some people are nutritionally deficient in certain vitamins and minerals. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So there are certain vitamins and minerals that your body needs to regulate blood sugar, and certain minerals like we're talking about like chromium or magnesium. And then it always goes blank when I'm trying to list off.
Right. Well, there's magnesium, zinc.
Yes.
Manganese, taurine, there's amino acid taurine, there's chromium and vanadium. Those are the different types of minerals or amino acids and vitamins and even vitamin D
And B
is
as well.
part of it as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's so many vitamins and minerals that are all playing a part to help our body regulate, your hormones. And we're not just talking about regulating the blood sugar always, but also like the stress response that happens too is, like what does our body need? Like vitamin C every time we're initiating that, like we're calling upon the adrenals, like you were saying. There's just a lot going on. So just having a diet that's sufficient in the vitamins and nutrients that we need. And then there are also things like alcohol that's going to deplete those. And then, especially like the important ones that you need for blood sugar balance. And then also certain medications and over-the-counter medications can also often deplete what you need. And then maybe not having enough stomach acid so that you can digest and absorb these nutrients. So there's a lot going on that can impact, how well your body regulates blood sugar.
absolutely.
So it's not just a matter of food. And like you said, stress is an important piece, and even how exercise impacts your body too. Like, is it a stress? Is it stressing your body? Is it sending you over the edge, like too much stress?
Right.
Or is it just the right amount?
Overtraining and overdrive, especially, these Olympic athletes, right? How many of them are putting their bodies under stress, right? And so it is looking at the whole picture and looking at all of those variables that are really important to sort of nail down. But so stress reduction and stress management it really should be a part of that, and noticing what causes that alarm to go off. So it might be more than just blood sugars. There might be other things that are causing those alarms to go off in the adrenal sense. And so every time you go, you're like, it kicks off. And so if you're doing that a lot, you're going into overdrive and asking your body to do more and more and more and more. And if you're not taking care of your body during those times, then it's eventually going to get depleted. So it's hard to know, for some people, I mean, it's really figuring and drilling down to their personal history. Is it blood sugars that's causing these issues, or is the blood sugar dysregulation a result of these issues? You don't know if it's the chicken or the egg, but ultimately it really is a major piece that needs to be addressed. And if it's not addressed, it's really hard to do anything else.
Yes. Yeah. And blood sugar dysregulation, like I call it your blood sugar, if your blood sugar's gone wonky, like if you feel like all day your energy is up and down and your mood is up and down, chances are your blood sugar is too. And if it's in that place, it's causing stress on your body all day long. And, like no matter the other stresses that are going on, that's happening all day. So that's just that extra layer. And then also when you have stress, whether it's stress with your blood sugar or stress from something else, it's calling upon those nutrients we were mentioning that you need to regulate your blood sugar. So it's like you're, by having more stress, you're even depleting even more of those nutrients that you need. So like you're going to need more of them than the average person when you have more stress.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because, and the top two that I always think of are magnesium and zinc. Top three: magnesium, zinc, and vitamin D, right? Maybe top four. I think I'll add vitamin C into that too.
Yeah, but what's great is that when you start working with somebody in a functional way, like you can really look and see like, oh, this is what your body, like I have a feeling your body needs this, 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 and this. And then you can, we can personalize it for each person because these are all really necessary. But when it comes down to it, everybody's going to have some different deficiencies from the other person.
Absolutely. So I think we've talked a lot about what causes hypoglycemia, how to figure out whether or not you have hypoglycemia, how to sort of stabilize your blood sugars, and what might be some of the vitamins and minerals and that might be missing if you are having these issues. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that I think is important for our listeners to know?
For blood sugar regulation, I mean, I think a lot of times too, it's important to consider that, we think of blood sugar balance as it having a lot to do with food, right? There's a lot more going on than that. And I think even more things than we haven't discussed, gut health. There are a lot of other things going on, and how you had mentioned the chicken and the egg. And when it comes to stress, sometimes we might not be regulating our blood sugar wells because maybe there's a thyroid issue, or maybe there are some other underlying issues that once we bring those back in balance, that our body can have a better time regulating our blood sugar. So if you do feel like, okay, like my blood sugar is wonky, as I like to say, like, oh, it feels like I have these highs and lows, I'm hangry, I've got the dizziness, I maybe have these panic attacks or the anxiety, it could be related to my blood sugar. You can, like, step one is maybe it's just try to figure out if you can do those other things that we had mentioned about, like having more stable blood sugar throughout the day, or fat, fiber, and protein, low glycemic foods. But then also, finding out, is there something else that could be playing a part in my hypoglycemic episodes that
and tracking it, really tracking it. So awareness is really the biggest key, and really thinking about this and thinking about how your moods are in relationship to food and what you're doing, or lack of food, right? And what you're doing. Sometimes so many people, they go throughout the day and they forget to eat. And I used to be one of those people. I never had breakfast, and then I would bring my lunch, and I would get so busy that at 4:00 in the afternoon, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't have lunch. No wonder I'm so tired. No wonder I can't think, right? But it didn't affect my mood, but it certainly affected me. And then I'd be starving. And so really, if you catch yourself doing that, that's not healthy. You're really forcing your body to put out blood sugars because you're not providing that the raw materials that your body needs to actually function throughout the day. So,
Yes.
breakfast is so important. And so if you catch yourself doing that, you need to change those habits, because ultimately that will, your body will not be able to keep up. And then you will start having those dips in blood sugars. So.
Yeah. We were talking about, like what food does, but also when you don't have food is such an important one to consider as well. Like when you go for a long period of times and your body can't handle that. Yes.
Right.
So important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know you have 2 quizzes that I'm going to share with the listeners. They just need to see more when they click on the link, and they'll have access to your self-assessment quizzes, one for blood sugar and the other is for hormones.
Yes.
And if they wanted to get in touch with you, I'll also put your contact information, and so that they can learn more about what you do. And why don't you tell us where you're actually located, because you are in Europe, but where specifically?
I'm in Amsterdam.
Cool.
I'm American, but I moved here. Well, I moved to Europe 16 years ago. So.
Oh, cool. That's
Yeah.
Great. So I look forward to someday meeting you in person. It's been great getting to know you, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking about blood sugars with me. And hopefully we'll have some more people educated about this and especially aware about how blood sugars can affect your mood.
So important. And thank you for spreading this message and for all the good work that you do, because it's so important. And to everybody who's listening to this as well, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.